Episódio de hoje com a doutora Susan Crockford, zoóloga, bióloga evolucionária, arqueóloga e expert em ursos polares e morsas. Ela nos contará sobre seu livro Ursos Polares, a Catástrofe que Nunca Ocorreu, e também conversaremos sobre o famoso vídeo da National Geographic mostrando ursos polares morrendo de fome e se afogando, e o novo sobre um documentário da Netflix, da Our Planet, que mostra morsas se suicidando por causa das mudanças climáticas. Isso é verdade? Veremos, ela nos explicará em detalhes. E subscrevam o nosso canal. All right, we are back to the DaniPod, and today we have a very special guest, Dr. Susan Crockford. She's a zoologist and an evolutionary biologist, archaeologist, and an expert on polar bears, walrus, and dogs.
Yes.
Her book, The Polar Bear Catastrophe That Never Happened, is a must-read. Welcome to the show, Dr. Susan. I'm glad that you were able to accept my invitation. How are you?
I'm just fine. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. You know that Brazil is the country of football, or soccer, as you say in Canada.
We say soccer, yes.
But I just realized a couple of years ago that Brazil is also the country of polar bears, because some years ago, everybody saw a famous movie, and that was also the cover of a National Geographic magazine. With
Yes.
a polar bear dying because of global warming that we were told.
Yes.
Was that polar bear really dying because of global warming?
No, there actually was no evidence whatsoever that climate change or global warming would account for its poor condition. And it really was a false message that was being sent out. But you know what they wanted to do was to present a really emotional message to people, to kind of pull at their heartstrings and make them feel badly about climate change and not to think about what really must be happening. And in the end, National Geographic had to admit that, in fact, there was no evidence that that bear was starving because of climate change.
So, but what happened to that polar bear? Do we know why he was dying?
No, we don't know. We don't know. Apparently, the people who were filming it just watched it swim away and never told anyone about that it was there or that it was in such poor condition, which was really, you know, an unethical, and, in my opinion, an immoral thing to do. That they should have contacted conservation officers that were available in one of the communities nearby, and they would have come out and put the bear out of its misery. But if they had done that, they would have ruined their exclusive. It would have all become the news, and then they wouldn't have this wonderful footage and been able to use it the way they wanted to. So they kept quiet.
But we didn't, at least here in Brazil, I don't know anyone that heard that National Geographic retracted that.
Yes, they did, but it wasn't until August of the following year. So it was August of 2018, and it was in their magazine and online. And it also included a short essay by one of the photographers who was trying to explain that, you know, it wasn't really their fault, that the public had misinterpreted their message, and a very long sob story about how it wasn't really their fault, and that National Geographic had gone too far, which was what National Geographic admit. They said they had gone too far, say that the bear was starving because of climate change, when in fact there was no evidence that that was so.
The polar bears live in a really rough environment, don't they? What they die of? What they die? They drown. They die of hunger. What is?
Well, mostly they die of starvation. It's the most common cause of death for polar bears in the wild because they have so few enemies. And so a bear can die of starvation when they're young because it takes a while for them to learn to hunt efficiently. Okay. And they can die of starvation if they get sick or injured and then can't hunt. And when they're old, they lose strength and tend to get illnesses and therefore can't hunt properly. And so dying of old age for polar bears is really dying of starvation. So it's not difficult to actually go out in the wild and find a bear who is starving, because some of them are always going to be starving. It's just a natural process for them.
And how long do they live?
Well, they can live into their 20s and sometimes extraordinarily into their early 30s, but probably, with the changes in hunting practices, probably 20 to 25 years, something like that.
Okay. And when and why did you start having an interest in polar bears?
Oh, since I was a child, I've always been interested in them because I've been interested in the Arctic, and I've been interested in Arctic dogs, the sled dogs that pull the sleds, and the Inuit that live in the Arctic, and polar bears. But I became interested in the bears professionally when I started looking at questions about evolution and how one species turns into another.
Yeah.
And in the 1990s, I was looking at those questions in quite a bit of detail and looking at the question of how a wolf could turn into a dog, biologically speaking, but also how a brown bear could turn into a polar bear when you look at all the biological changes that have to occur. And that was actually the topic of my 2004 PhD dissertation.
Oh, and so brown bear or polar bear is like an evolution of the brown bear?
Yes. So the ancestor of the polar bear is the brown bear. We call, in some parts of North America, they call the brown bear a grizzly, but it's called a brown bear in Europe. It's the same animal, essentially.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
And to what places have you been to study these animals?
I don't go out into the field. I sit and study reports of studies that other scientists have done, and look to make summaries and to make critical assessments. It's really what I was trained to do for when I was doing my PhD, and that's what I'm good at. So I don't go into the field to study these animals. I use the information that other people have gathered to pull together to present to the public what I've learned essentially about the bears.
Those are rough environments to go to, aren't they? To get there.
Absolutely, absolutely. And really, when I think realistically about the time in my life when I was finished my undergraduate university work and might have liked to go into the Arctic, there were hardly any women at all who were doing that kind of work. It's very rough. It's also expensive, and I think you would have had to have a fair amount of personal wealth to be able to do things like, buy the coats and boots and all those kinds of things that you would need in order to participate. And I just wasn't in a position to do that.
My aunt is an archaeologist also here in Brazil, and she's been to the Amazon many years ago. She lived there for, I think, 4 or 5 years, and it's a rough environment for her, but she loved it. And I can imagine how it is. It's not easy for a woman to go to those places.
Exactly,
And
exactly.
when did you become involved in relation to the extinction of polar bears? When did it become an issue for you? What happened?
Well, in 2008, 2007, 2008, I was asked to comment on a document that was being prepared for Congress in the United States when they were preparing to put polar bears on the endangered species list. And I realized that all of the work that I had done on evolution and ecology of polar bears, that I could use that to put together for this report. And all of the suggestions that I made for this were accepted as being useful. And so I realized that it was something that, in fact, I could do, that it was a niche I could fill in the science communication area. And then in 2012, I started my polar bear science blog, and then began writing on a regular basis about some of these things that I'd learned about in the literature.
And how are polar bears doing? Have they faced climate changes before?
Oh, absolutely. Many changes before. It's not confirmed how long ago polar bears actually came to be. The estimates range between about 160,000 to maybe 600,000 years ago.
Yeah.
But even if you consider those time periods, it means that the bears have survived through very much warm periods that are warmer than we are experiencing right now, 3 or 4 times. So we don't know how they did it, but we do know they survived, or they wouldn't be here today. So we have to assume, and I have always assumed, that they would have some strategies for dealing with changes in sea ice that have occurred, over their evolutionary history. And certainly what is apparent now is that that's absolutely true, that they will shift their feeding areas, they will shift their denning areas according to changes in sea ice, and they don't just sit and die.
Wait to die.
Sit and wait. Because that habitat is always changing over the long term, they do have strategies in place to deal with that. We don't always see it on a short-term basis, but we're seeing it now, of the kinds of things that they're able to do.
And have the ice declined a lot in the Arctic? And
well, it definitely has, especially the ice in summer. Of course, that's what is the big news, is that between 1979, 1980, and 2020, the ice has dropped by at least 40% over that time. But that drop really came in 2007. And since then, it's been up and down a bit, but really it hasn't gone up, it hasn't gone down remarkably since 2007. And so if we look at what's been happening with the bears since 2007, we can see that, in fact, the prediction that if the ice dropped that low, that they would be on the verge of extinction, just wasn't true.
what happened?
The numbers have at least stabilized and may even have increased if you're looking at the global numbers. So I can give you the numbers in 2005, before the ice dropped. The number that's usually used is about 24,500. And the number that was used in 2015 when the IUCN, who does the red list, when they did their assessment, the number they came up with was 26,000. So it's the absolute count has gone up a bit, but that's probably not statistically significant.
Mhm.
But what biologists had predicted was that if the ice dropped that low and stayed that low for 10 years, that 2/3 of polar bears would be gone.
Hmm.
So they had predicted a very dramatic decline in numbers, and that clearly hasn't happened.
Do you agree with that estimate? Do you think that's a fair estimate?
What,
Yeah.
of the numbers right now?
Of the numbers right
So
now?
what's happened, so as I said, that estimate was made in 2015. There have been surveys, counts of some bear subpopulations that have been done since then that would probably raise that average count from about 26,000 to about 30,000. But I actually think that if you go through the regions that have never had a survey, where the numbers have never been counted, that you can make a plausible estimate that the average number could be as high as 39,000.
Oh, that's much more. Like
That's
almost
much more. Yes.
much more.
Yes.
But are scientists trying to make this assessment right now to know the truth of that, or they don't want to do that?
Well, not really. Really, when they're making their estimates, it seems to me that they always try to make it sound lower, as low as it possibly can be, because that supports their assertions that the numbers are going to decline and that the bears are in a lot of trouble. They really don't want anyone to know that the population could possibly still be increasing.
Because that would go against what they predicted before, maybe.
Exactly. And what they predict for the future. And really, that's what it becomes really confusing for the public, because for all other species, when we look at whether they're in good shape or threatened or endangered, we look at their conditions right now. Like what are the numbers right now? What are the conditions at the moment? But for polar bears, for the first time, that species the assessment was only based on what the scientists thought might happen in the future. So all of these are predictions of what might happen in the future. They're not an assessment of what's happening right now.
And they became the symbol of global warming. And we have so many images of polar bears that are skinny, drowning. And what do you think is the role of NGOs in relation to polar bears? And why do they do this scary about the dying polar bears? Why do they want to give us that image?
Well, for these organizations, you would think that really their motivation was really to be saving a species. But the reality is that they're businesses and they need to make money. And what they have learned is that images of starving bears and drowning bears is what makes people feel guilty and encourages them to make donations to these organizations. And ultimately, that's their goal, is to continue to get people to donate money. But very little of that money really goes back to doing anything that is making any material difference to the survival of the animals.
The budget of I think of WWF has the symbol of WWF is a polar bear, isn't it?
It's a panda.
It's a panda. It's a panda. It's another bear. Yeah, but but their budget is huge, and their payment is also very good for
Absolutely,
the ones that work for them.
And they really learned early that kind of, I call it animal tragedy porn. that's, that they learned that that's what generates the most donations from the public. And so now they go out of their way to use those kinds of images.
Brazil has been under pressure to preserve at all costs the Amazon forest here.
Yes.
And as it was about to vanish, and we know that NGOs and other governments are using this strategy to protect their internal markets from Brazilian agricultural products, for instance.
Yes.
Has Canada felt pressure from environmentalist groups or any other country in relation to polar bears that Canada should do something more to preserve polar bears? Has Canada suffered from that?
Well, I'm sure that they get a lot of pressure, but so far, the organization that's responsible for assessing the conservation status of polar bears has continued to say that it's only a species of what they call special concern, which is a lower risk level than threatened or vulnerable. So of all of the countries in the world, in fact, Canada has been the most reasonable in terms of its official status for the polar bear, even though they acknowledge that there may be issues in the future, but that at the moment, the status just bears watching, essentially.
Can we talk a little bit about walrus? Because
absolutely, yeah.
I was watching with my daughters that documentary. I think it was WWF again and Netflix that co-produced a documentary that.
Oh, is that the Our Planet?
Our Planet, yes, that one.
Yes.
And well, my daughters who love animals, they didn't want to watch that long, because I think in the first episode they have that episode that the walrus were committing suicide because of global warming.
Yes.
And was that what happened? Is that there is some similarity with that polar bear story from National Geographic?
It's a long story, but in fact, what we have discovered happened was that there was a herd of walrus came to that area, and some of them climbed to the top of this cliff, which they have done for at least 10 years. So it wasn't, it was something that everyone knew had been happening. And a number of polar bears, one Russian news report said there were 20 bears actually there at one point, were deliberately hunting the walrus and frightening them until they fell off the cliff, so that they could then go to the bottom of the cliff and eat the bodies. So that was the big picture of what was happening. And it became apparent that the people who were filming the Our Planet film also had people from the BBC with them.
All right.
And so they actually filmed the bears hunting the walrus as one sort of separate film sequence, and then filmed at the end some walruses falling off the cliff without showing the bears. So the sequence that you saw on Our Planet was the bit from the end where there were no polar bears. And in fact, they never mentioned polar bears at all, and implied that all of these walruses had fallen, like hundreds of them, that all of these carcasses on the beach were because they had just all fallen because they needed to get to the sea, when in fact they knew that it was the bears the 2 days before that had driven the walruses off the cliff deliberately, because they filmed them.
They lied.
They lied.
Why do they do that?
Well, I think because the reaction that your daughters had of being horrified and not wanting to watch was exactly the effect that they wanted. And they were trying to deliberately horrify people so that they would make donations and that they would support political policies to do something about climate change.
Were you trying to have another icon of global warming, maybe?
Well, I think perhaps that's also true, that they were realizing that polar bears really weren't cooperating very well. You know, they were doing too well at surviving, and that perhaps they could use the walrus as a new icon. And this, one of the sort of backstories is that in the United States, they had been being pressured to list Pacific walrus as threatened. And I think that WWF and Netflix, all the people who were involved in that film, were anticipating that walrus were going to be added to the endangered species list, and that this was going to fit into their big plan. But as it turned out, it didn't happen.
Are they in danger?
No. So in fact, the scientists who were looking at all of the evidence about walruses said there is no evidence that they are being harmed by lack of summer sea ice, and there's no evidence that there has been a population decline, and therefore they were decided not to list them on their endangered species list. But they didn't know that at the time they were filming, you see. Their plan was that this was all going to fit in together, but it didn't really work out that way.
It didn't.
And I mean, that's the document there, is put together by all of these US biologists who have been able to show that, in fact, you know, feeding from the beach instead of the ice is no different for them. You know, there was no harm coming to the walrus from feeding from a beach rather than feeding from ice. And in the film, they were trying to make it appear that this was such a different thing to be happening, and that it was obviously harming them and putting them in great jeopardy, when that was clearly not the case.
And do you know what that's not the case? Why?
Like why, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, really, what we know from looking at historical documents is that the walruses do most of the time feed from the ice. Now they're feeding on things like clams and snails and, you know, sea worms and that kind of thing that are on the bottom. But they can certainly access those foods from the beach as easily as from the ice. And in fact, one of the other things that's happened is that now that there's there's less sea ice in the summer, there's actually more food for those bottom creatures that they eat. And so there seems to be lots of food for them. So while in the past, such high numbers of walrus as there is now might have, you know, wiped out all of the food, there seems to be lots of food for them because there is more plankton in the open water when there's less ice.
And how has been your experience since starting to tell the truth about polar bears and issues related to climate change and walrus? Were you threatened morally or physically?
Well, certainly I have been attacked by my colleagues, and attacked in the sense of my integrity and my reputation has been attacked. And in, well, about the same time that walrus footage was being filmed, there was a paper that was published in a scientific journal called Bioscience, where 14 authors got together and really put in a concerted effort to besmirch my scientific integrity and really to discredit anything that I said about polar bears, more as an attack on me personally, rather than trying to address the concerns that I had raised about what was going on.
And did it have any consequences for you? I heard that.
Well, certainly one of the main ones was that I lost the adjunct status that I had had for 15 years at the University of Victoria here. And it's, we can't draw a straight line between the events, but it's certainly I had held that position for 15 years, and all of a sudden, the next time it came up for renewal, it was declined without any reason given whatsoever.
Besides the revenue that you had there, you have any other consequences to you? I mean, what did the university give you?
Well, I mean, the adjunct professor position is not paid, so
Yeah.
it's it's just but it's a position that you really need in order to operate as a scientist. So that's something that I would need in order to do scientific studies or collaborations with colleagues, or participate, for example, in getting a grant for studies. I would need that accreditation. But one of the other things that happened was that I had been participating in a university program that was called the Speakers Bureau, which was a volunteer program for professors and students, graduate students who would give lectures to the community. So communities, groups, and schools and things, which was also a voluntary program. It was not paid. And I had been giving lectures on polar bears for a number of years. And all of a sudden, I was kicked out of that organization because they said that someone had claimed that my lectures on polar bears to children had lacked balance. And, it was one of those things where I was not given an opportunity to ask about what had happened. I wasn't confronted, with my accuser. I didn't know who this person or persons were that were accusing me of this. And it was just, I was just ended, and the university refused to answer any questions about it.
Do you think this is the reason why so many academics don't just follow what the consensus want them to do? Because if they don't, they will lose reputation or places in the universities?
Oh, absolutely. Because it is so politically charged, and a number of other people who have done what I have done in the field of climate change have been let go. And I felt that I was in a reasonably strong position because working at the university wasn't my main source of income. So I have a private business that provided me the income to keep going. And so it meant even if I was, I lost my adjunct status and I couldn't participate in the Speakers Bureau, I still had my livelihood. But right now I'm involved in a dispute with the university because they've decided that because I can't wear a mask because of my asthma, they won't allow me into the building where the collections are that I need to make my living. Now, this is a clear violation of human rights.
Yes.
But they have decided for some reason that they are above all of that. And
because they have a good cause, they think.
I think they're coming after me. This is another way they think they can destroy me.
For sure.
But we'll see. I haven't, that battle hasn't been finished yet.
Yeah. Do you have colleagues that are helping you on the field or on the university?
Well, I certainly, now that I'm a member of this global community of people who are really interested in making sure that the truth of all of this is coming up, they have given me tremendous support. I have the support of a few people at the university, but not very many, I can tell you.
Oh, that's too bad, because well, here in Brazil, the universities in North America and in Europe are our benchmarks. And it's scary what is happening there. We've seen what happened to Jordan Peterson in Canada also, what they try to do to him. There's another guy, I think it's Michael Millerman, a philosopher in the University of Toronto.
All
also.
Right, yeah.
How can you or us rescue your universities? You know, what hope do we have if well-known universities are purging ideas, people, data, facts that don't fall within what they want to promote? We hear about a lot of consensus in science right now, but science is not consensus. It's the opposite of it, isn't it?
No, exactly. Yeah. Well, I don't know if you've heard of Peter Ridd from Australia, who's been, so his university fired him for speaking out about Great Barrier Reef. And so he is still in the process of challenging his university in court about that decision. But one of the things he has suggested is that what scientists can do is to create what he's calling a quality assurance program. So, you know, something, external teams that can evaluate these extraordinary scientific claims and really make sure that the data is to the standard that we would demand for claims that are that extraordinary and that are the foundation for making big political policy changes. So that we need to put in place those kinds of checks against the science that is biased, so that the public can be better assured that what they're getting is sound science.
It seems like the end game is political, or it is political. They want something.
No, for sure. And, you know, certainly for some scientists, it may just be that they're really trying to protect their funding. That one of the things that's happened with all of this is that, you know, if you say that your aim is to provide information for climate change, you're almost assured of getting your grant funded, right? And so it's a game that you have to play if you want to get your funds to do the work that you want to do. It doesn't mean that all of those scientists are actually as political as some of the ones we hear about. Mm-hmm. However, they are participating in the system that perpetuates it, you know, and that by going along that we're going to study the ecology of this squirrel to see how it affects climate change. That you know, it's they are in fact enabling this whole thing to continue.
Yeah, you have to be a very brave researcher to go against all of this. I have
Yeah.
to say that I admire you. You are a maverick, as you say. Right? You don't back down. You speak truth to power. Why do you continue to fight? What makes you keep going?
Well, it's because I'm a scientist, and like science is not just what I do, it's who I am. And if I can't have faith in how it works, then it ruins my faith, my whole foundation in my life. And so I have to fight for it, because fighting for the science is fighting for my own self and for what grounds me in my life.
And how can people help you keeping your work, your
Well,
fight?
they can buy my books is one way to support, and like that's a good way. And one of the methods that people have told me that they have done is bought one of my books and donated it to their local library, for example, and or donate it to a local school. And that these are things I get a little bit of money back, but it spreads the word. And the more people who learn to look at these issues in a more skeptical fashion, the better all of us will be.
Great. And apart from the polar bear catastrophe that never happened, what other books did you write?
I have a book for children that's called Polar Bear Facts and Myths.
Mm-hmm.
And it should soon be out and available in Portuguese. It's being translated into Portuguese by colleagues in Portugal.
All right.
And so I don't know when, hopefully by this summer that will be available. But otherwise, it's also been translated into French, German, Dutch, and Norwegian.
Oh, good.
So getting this information to children want to know about these issues, but they need to know it without being frightened. So this gives them the information that they want and need without telling them scary stories about the future, because that may or may not happen. It's not really my big concern at this point. I also have two novels now, and one of those novels is what I call a polar bear attack thriller.
Oh, is it?
Yes, and it's called Eaten, Eaten.
Okay.
And it's set in Newfoundland in eastern Canada at the time when normally you sometimes see polar bears coming ashore when they finished feeding on seals. And I sort of imagined what might happen if for some reason there were no seals out there for them to eat and they came on shore and started to hunt people.
Oh my God. It's a thriller.
Yes.
Is it? Oh, okay.
I kind of think of it as Jaws, but but for the beach, and in the winter when it's really cold. So anyway, it was kind of a fun thing to do to try and get a little bit of science for people who wouldn't open a science book. So
all right. Well, I think you wrote in your Twitter or on your blog that you are working on a new book. Is it a secret?
I am.
Or is it a secret?
A secret? Well, it is, I can give you a clue that it is about something we talked about.
Oh, walrus?
So it shouldn't be too much longer.
Okay.
And, it's, and I guess my next clue is that it's not a novel. This will be another science book. Oh. And I think that you will find it interesting.
And Susan, have you been to Brazil?
No, I
No.
have not been to Brazil,
No.
or anywhere in South America, actually.
No. Well, I told Rupert Darwell, who was with us last week, why can't we dream to have a real plus 45 or 50, or I don't know, with people like you that would show how real science is made? What do you think about this? Is it possible?
Well, yeah, absolutely possible. And, I mean, one has to think about these kinds of things. And certainly when was that now? 2019. So in the fall of 2019, I went to Europe and went to 6 different cities, I think, and gave lectures in all of those cities.
Oh.
And I think it worked really well for, because it was less expensive to do, it all in one trip.
Yeah.
And visit a number of places. But when that's going to happen with COVID and all the travel stuff, I have no idea.
Oh, that's too bad. COVID.
I mean, we're not even allowed in Canada really to hardly leave the country, unless you do all the quarantines and all of that nonsense.
Nobody is accepting Brazilians abroad also. It's hard.
Yeah.
I've had COVID already, so I can, even though I had COVID, I cannot go anywhere.
Well, that's astonishing. It just and that's the other thing really that comes into it. Like we talk about skepticism in relation to polar bear science or climate science. And I think what's happening now with COVID is that many people who never thought about being skeptical of climate change now are skeptical about some of the things with COVID. It makes no sense.
Yeah.
For example, that someone who's had COVID should be required to have a vaccine.
Yeah.
That makes no scientific sense.
And I'm afraid about this, to have a vaccine after having COVID.
Yeah. So, I mean, but those kinds of things are making people think. And I think it's going to hopefully rub off on all of those other areas where they should be skeptical as well. And that will be a good thing.
I could see that people that was skeptic about climate change was skeptic about this huge scared about COVID also.
Yes. Well, because once you learn to be skeptical, like you can't turn it off. It's, if you want to call it a bullshit detector, right? You just, like that really sounds like a really wild claim. And people like myself, we know where to look to find the data. So you go to the places where you can find the actual information, not what the newspaper or the government is giving you. And then you have a basis for saying, well, I'm just not going to believe their scary interpretation of what's going on.
But the politicians like Boris Johnson, they are selling our way out of COVID with a Green New Deal,
Yes.
To change our way of life.
Yes.
I don't know. It's really scary.
It is scary.
All right,
Without
Susan.
a doubt. Without a doubt. It's going very far.
But one last question. I know you have a lot of things to do. If you could have something from Brazil, what would you like?
Something from Brazil. I think a really nice photo of a jaguar.
Oh, do you know Peter Crawshaw? Peter Crawshaw was one of the experts, the biggest experts on jaguars. And I knew him. He died of COVID.
Did he really?
2 weeks ago, yeah.
Oh dear, that's
unfortunately, and it was very sad. But jaguars are wonderful. We are thinking about going to the Pantanal in July to see them. Yeah.
That would be very cool.
Oh.
Very cool.
All right. Thank you. If you want to educate yourself about polar bears, please go to polarbearscience.com. What else, Susan, can we say?
Well, and all of my books that are available are listed on that blog. So, and just be skeptical. It's good for you, no matter what the topic.
All right. Thank you very much for everything.
You're welcome.